Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee on this Wednesday night, December the 19th, 2018. We're just now 5 days, I guess 5 shopping days left. Christmas is next Tuesday. We've only got 12 days left in the year, winding down and going out on a very active note. Let me just say right off the top, if you are traveling starting later tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday at the very least in the 3-day time frame. If you're traveling by plane and you're anywhere up and down the East Coast, or perhaps you're heading to some of the East Coast cities, you are going to probably experience weather-related travel delays. It's not going to be for snow. This is all rain, but this is a pretty hefty storm system that we're going to be dealing with. And one particular spot that I want to point out that is going to be problematic, because I know from people that live in the Northeast, they go back and forth to the state of Florida, especially this time of year. If you are traveling to Florida, or if you're traveling from Florida on northward, later tomorrow night, there is going to be severe weather issues in Florida. So bear that in mind. Check with your airline, give yourself extra time, or make whatever travel changes you may have to make with regards to getting to your final destination. Going to be crazy because this week, these next 4 days, very, very heavily traveled in the U.S. I think it's even heavier now than it is going into Thanksgiving. So bear that in mind. Now let's start off with the short range. We've got a lot to cover tonight because of this storm, and also the fact that, believe it or not, white Christmas chances, at least according to the European model in the world it lives in, we have still the chances that we could see a white Christmas, at least not only for my area, but if you believe the European, for many areas in the northern part of the Ohio Valley, Chicago, Detroit possibly, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York City, out to southern New England. This is just the Europeans doing that, but we'll get to that later. Meanwhile, flood watches are up from northeastern Virginia all the way up into southern Maine and through upstate New York. The flood watches are for the likelihood that much of this area is going to see 2 to 3 inches of rain. Some of this rain will be enhanced by thunderstorms that are going to pop up probably on Friday, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some locally higher amounts. We've got flood watches up for the coastal Carolinas. We also have flood watches up from Florida, north of, once you start going north of, say, Naples and Sarasota, and then on northward from there to through Tampa, north and east to Jacksonville, and then northwest of the Florida Panhandle, along with parts of southern Georgia. I think you're going to probably wind up seeing additional flood watches going up probably on Thursday morning, as the Weather Service's offices in between evaluate what their rain and thunderstorm risks are going to be. There are just some wind issues scattered around in the Rockies, and we do have a storm off the west coast, and that purple that you see, those are storm warnings up for the coastal waters there, so there'll be another surge of weather activity coming in to the northwest. The one yesterday, which represents the energy that's getting involved with this particular system, it produced a tornado in Port Orchard, Washington, which is not that far from Seattle. It's to the west of Seattle on the other side of Puget Sound. I didn't really get a chance to take a look to see what they came up with regards to the strength of that tornado, but the live feeds that I saw and some of the videos were pretty impressive. So here's our U.S. satellite loop tonight, and the signatures on the satellite really are all there. They're pretty obvious. The blossoming tropical moisture, the Gulf of Mexico is wide open with this, and you're getting tons of moisture now coming in to the central part of the Gulf Coast and moving northward. We see it pretty evident on the radar. Thunderstorms and some heavy rains that are breaking out there, and you're starting to see a feed of tropical air, tropical moisture and clouds coming out of the Gulf and moving across the state of Florida and into the southeastern part of the United States, and all of that is pushing northward. The energy that's up in the northwest is going to phase with this energy that is running across the Gulf states. You're going to have a full latitude phased upper trough that's going to go to what we call a negative tilt. It's going to be oriented northwest southeast, and this is how you get intense systems to develop. The bottom part of this trough is going to be very strong because of all of the southern energy, and that is going to be lifting up the east coast and getting energized by the northern part of the trough that phases in with it. So this is an all rain event. There are no snow issues coming out of this, as we said earlier. It's just all the other things that are happening with regards to winds, rain, coastal flooding, et cetera, will make traveling difficult. And even if you're driving, there's another issue here too. You want to at least try to find your way around all the activity that's going to be going on. Now, with regards to severe weather at the moment, the Storm Prediction Center does not have any risk area for severe indicated tonight, but you can see the band of rain and thunderstorms, and it looks like we're getting a pretty decent squall line that's developing out in the Gulf of Mexico, south of the Alabama-Mississippi Gulf Coast. I'll show it on the wider radar view in a second. And you also have some downpours and thunderstorms in the eastern Gulf that are beginning to come onshore in the western part of Florida, and those are also moving to the northeast. But other than that, there's no other severe weather here to worry about. But we've got a big severe weather risk that is shaping up for tomorrow. We mentioned yesterday that the Storm Prediction Center, whenever you see them putting up a risk area early in the game, you got to pay attention. And that is what they did, because when they put it up early in the game, it usually winds up that the area is expanded. And indeed, we're going to take a look now at the forecast for tomorrow. You don't see enhanced risk that often in December, but for the east coast of Florida, you're talking about an enhanced risk of severe weather. And the rest of the state, Central and South Florida, in a slight risk. Also, that slight risk extends to the coastal areas of North Carolina, and the way they have it drawn, just kind of clipping that northeastern corner of South Carolina. Marginal risk just north of there, running up into Virginia, into southeastern Virginia, and a general risk of thunderstorms north and west of there. But this is this severe area here, I think screams pay attention. And a lot of the models that I looked at were really bullish on the idea of thunderstorm development for tomorrow. So I think we're really going to have to pay attention to this. And this is why I was saying earlier about traveling. If you're heading down to Florida or out from Florida on Thursday, you're going to have delays because of these thunderstorms that are probably going to develop and move on through. The models are all screaming, pay attention, look at me, and indeed we should do that. The WPC, hopefully I clicked on the right map. Let's see. Nope, I didn't. You can't fault me for trying. Hang on a second. I was hoping to do this, perhaps a bit less messy, but let me move this around so I can get to the WPC map. There we go. And we'll bring that up to the top. So let's look at these rainfall amounts, because they are going to be significant in some places. And you've got this band of 1.5 inches to 3 inches. I think that's probably a pretty good range, running from eastern North Carolina, eastern Virginia, over New Jersey, into Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and then running northeastward from there through much of southern and southeastern New England, and on up into parts of northeastern New England. So there's significant rains that are forecast to occur all the way up. And by the way, this is going to be rain all the way up to northern Maine. That's how warm this air is that's flooding the East Coast. You have some heavier rains, but a bit less under 1.75 inches, but still heavy enough that they could be problematic in the western parts of Virginia, North and South Carolina. Some areas a bit higher. They spend a lot of time, WPC, in figuring out the gaps in between. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. And the same goes for northwest Pennsylvania on up into upstate New York. In the west, with this next assault of a system coming in off the west coast, you continue to see what we've seen on the maps for days now, forecasting mega amounts of rain. And for the next 7 days, we're looking at rather significant amounts of rain from Northern California, mainly on the western side of the state, the western half of Northern California, the westernmost part of Oregon and Washington, in this band of several to many inches of rainfall as the Pacific continues to just drive in one rain system after another. Not a whole lot of the nation. There are pockets here where we will see dry weather conditions for the next 7 days, but it looks like a vast chunk of the country at some point in the next week will be participating in some form of precipitation. So I'm going to take this down. Just give me 1 second here. And we've got this already going, so we can now move on. I want to go to the surface map. And there's your low that is beginning to develop there right along the Louisiana coast south of Lafayette. The warm front extends south of New Orleans to just offshore the Gulf of Mexico. So this would pretty much match up with what we see on the radar. Actually, the warm front's probably pushed a bit further north, since this map was drawn for analysis done at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The latest map won't be out until about 8:30. But I want to take a look in Florida, because you're already seeing, you've got dew points down in the Keys in the middle 70s. So your tropical air still hasn't quite forced its way northward. You're seeing dew points in the low 60s and into the 50s as you go into central and north Florida, at least for now. But all of this tropical air is going to get in here, so we're going to see these dew points really soar through Florida and set that table up for severe weather. Of course, you got that deep trough. The southern part of this trough is very deep, and that is going to that's the mechanism that's going to be setting off all these thunderstorms for later tomorrow and tomorrow night in Florida. And in the meantime, you're also beginning to see the beginnings of some saturation going on in the Carolinas with that tropical moisture heading northward. So that's our friendly neighborhood low that is going to be causing all the trouble. Meanwhile, here in the Northeast, we're under a high that's off the New Jersey coast and continuing to slide out to the south and east. That is going to set up, by the way, a very tight south-southeast flow, south-southeast gradient for tomorrow night into Friday morning. And I think winds along the immediate coast from Delmarva all up to southern New England, Long Island, coastal New Jersey, or out to the Cape, we're going to see gales, and would not at all be surprised, depending on how this whole structure lifts up, that we could see some wind gusts of 50 to 60 miles an hour during the early morning hours on Friday. Not a whole lot from the standpoint. There's hardly any cold air, by the way. If you look across the Great Lakes, temperatures are in the upper 30s to upper 40s. You go back through the plains, you got temperatures in the 40s and 50s. There really isn't a whole lot of cold air to speak of in the United States at the moment. And remember, we've been talking about that strongly positive East Pacific oscillation. This is what happens where you wind up basically flooding the United States with Pacific air, almost like a fire hose across the Pacific, and then moving across the U.S. That happens from time to time over most winters. It's not an unusual event to see the jet stream set up this way. But not all patterns last forever, okay? This too shall change. Now here's the radar tonight, the tight view. And there's your weather that's going on with that warm front in the warm sector setting up. And you can see there's some strong thunderstorms just east of Boothville and east of New Orleans, south of Biloxi, and southwest of Mobile. There's heavy rains in southeastern Mississippi extending northward into the northern part of the state. That's moving into western Alabama. And then, of course, you've got that other feed now. You're seeing that rain that is moving in, and some heavier rains that are moving in off the Gulf into Florida. Seems to be concentrated more around the Tampa-St. Pete area than anywhere else. So elsewhere, with respect to the radar, there's not a whole lot of action. We've got some showers back through parts of Missouri, western Missouri and Kansas. But look at the structure here. Look at the radar echoes and the structure, and you can see this upper trough. You see how there's almost this V shape that has developed. And just watch how the echoes are moving northwest to southeast from Colorado into northern Texas, and then you go into Oklahoma and on up through Missouri and Kansas, and they're moving southwest to northeast. So you got northwest to southeast on one side, southwest to northeast on the other side. So there's your upper trough that is taking shape. Not a whole lot of weather yet coming in to the Pacific Northwest, by the way. Just getting some lead showers coming in there, and you've got some precip up in the northern lakes in northern Michigan on the Upper Peninsula, and the rest of the east is nice and quiet, at least for now. So all revving up for this storm. Now let's take a look at the models tonight. I'm going to start with the GFS. I'm sorry, we're going to start with the NAM. The NAM, I like using the NAM when you get inside the short range, because at least you can see the NAM. The NAM's picture here is actually what it thinks the radar should look like. And the GFS is actually giving you rainfall amounts on its map. So it's two different things. And sometimes you look at the GFS, you see all this green and blue, and you're thinking that, okay, that's like solid coverage of rain and snow. It's not. It's good to look and see what the model is actually depicting as far as the radar is concerned. And we'll take it out. This is at 7 a.m. Thursday morning. And you can see that very strong squall line that develops out in the central Gulf from the Alabama coast, the Florida, western part of the Florida Panhandle, right down into the Gulf of Mexico. That is what is headed for the state of Florida later Thursday. The leading edge of rain is into South Carolina at this point. You've got some scattered rain areas up as you go further to the north. All of this lifting northward because of the fact that the trough is phasing and you're getting it to go negative, okay? A negative tilt. That's northwest to southeast. And you'll see the upper flow when we show you the upper air in a bit. But there's your surface low. Now we're at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. We have a low sitting not too far from Tallahassee, and you have a squall line of storms from just west of Tampa, St. Pete, out into the Gulf. That line strengthens as we move into tomorrow evening. Gives a pretty good show for Central and South Florida. This is the area that the Storm Prediction Center is indicating with enhanced risk. And in the meantime, the rain area expands up the East Coast and through the Ohio Valley. There's a lead batch of rain that reaches New York City tomorrow evening. Then it's a little showery in nature. Then you get it to steady rain overnight into Friday morning. And there's now the line of storms is well offshore of Florida. But you still have, because of the way the trough is, you can see, look at where the low center is forecast by the NAM in western New York on Friday morning. There is a north-south front that extends from there all the way down to just right through Florida, and there are additional showers that pop up in parts of Alabama and Georgia because they're on the west side of that trough. That this is a long wave, what we would call a long wave. We've talked a lot about short waves. When they phase, we've got a long wave. The wave length goes literally well over 1,000 miles when you look at it. So the whole system is kind of getting stretched out. Look at the isobars, by the way, from the Delaware coast to New Jersey and Long Island and offshore. The high is out there. You've got the low. It's a 988 low in western PA. There's going to be a pretty tight pressure gradient here, and there might actually be another little surface low that'll form, and that'll tighten the gradient a bit more as this line of storms moves on through. The rains get a bit more showery in nature going into Friday night. And then as everything starts to pull up into Canada and the trough lifts, you get colder, drier air coming in behind it on Saturday. But notice, again, a lot of isobars there. The gradient very tight. So there will be wind issues in the mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast. This is why I was saying, as far as traveling is concerned on Saturday, if you're flying into the Northeast, there probably will be wind issues that will cause delays. And then gradually, as we work through the weekend, those winds will start to ease somewhat as we get into Sunday. Let's take a look at the upper air. You get an idea how it works on the surface. When you get this you can see how it plays out in the jet stream pattern. In fact, I think probably the better shot might be the full U.S. shot. Look at that trough. I mean, that's incredible. But let's back away, and you can see the phase occur. There's your southern shortwave in West Texas. That was actually from last night. Right now, it's in East Texas and out into the Gulf. And look in the north. You can see the system that came into the Pacific Northwest yesterday goes into the plains. That's that blue representative of that little blue patch up in Montana and North Dakota. You see how it dives in? It dives right in and phases with that southern energy. And then here's your long wave trough that's developing. This is for tomorrow afternoon. Now I'm going to just go to the paint box at this point. So give me 1 second here to bring that up. And okay, I'm getting a little faster with this sort of stuff. So this is tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. Notice that where the darkest blue is, this is the strongest part of the trough. The deepest part of this trough is down in the south, okay? It's down across Louisiana and out into the Gulf of Mexico. Right in here. Come on, draw for me. There we go. Right there. All right. There's the northern part of that trough, is what came out of the northern plains. It's all phased in. The trough at this point is what we would say is a neutral tilt. It's pretty much straight north-south. When it's tilted northeast-southwest, we call that a positive tilt, and that's when you see systems that we often refer to as being progressive, moving along from west to east. This going negative means that everything is going to be moving along south to north. The winds ahead of this here are all southerly, okay? They're not southwesterly, they're not west-southwesterly. They are actually southerly winds along the east, everywhere east of the Mississippi, pretty much. The strong southerly flow, and then on the other side of the trough, you've got this strong northerly flow that is present. And by the way, the reason why we don't have any cold air is when we look at the North America view, you're going to see that the bottom part of the trough, when you go up into Canada, the flow is also westerly. So everybody's getting flooded with Pacific air here. There's no real polar connection to bring down any cold air at this point. I think what we're seeing, by the way, is probably a thaw from the pattern that we've been in since the middle part of October to back not many days ago, where temperatures for much of the time have been below average. And we've broken out of that particular pattern. So I think what we're seeing right now is basically the thaw part. We had this first shot, now we're getting with thaw, and perhaps the thaw usually lasts a couple of weeks, and then you get the next pattern change. So just we'll keep that idea in mind when you're starting to look at the long range. Now, here we have the trough going into Friday. You can see that the bottom part of that trough just lifts up. So it's not moving really west to east. It's moving pretty much, everything's pretty much moving south to north with some eastward progression. Not a whole lot. It takes time. And then it just moves up into Canada. Now, here we are as we get to the weekend, okay? All of this, at this point, of course, you know, the weather part of this is going to be Thursday, Friday. When I say the weather part, I'm talking about rain, wind, thunderstorms, and everything else. And with respect to rainfall, we'll go back to the eastern view and, you know, kind of sticking with one model view. Otherwise, you know, this show would last for 3 hours if we had to do every single one. The models are all fairly consistent here in terms of the rainfall. It's a little blotchy in terms of those areas showing 2-3 inches or more because there is going to be a bit of a convective nature to all of this. So you are going to see some areas get more, some areas get less. So we're going to go see some variability. The wind for Thursday night into Friday morning, a lot is going to depend on, you know, a little surface low that's probably going to develop near the coast here, even though the primary low winds up where it is. I think there will be gales and the possibility that we could see some gusts of 50 miles an hour or more, again, from, say, the Delmarva Peninsula. This is actually for Friday morning. And this is a strong southerly flow, so we're looking at surface winds that are going to be going southeast and south-southeast and then south. Mistakenly, I got the date wrong for the full moon. The full moon is Saturday. So there will be tidal concerns, tidal flooding concerns for the Jersey Shore, especially if it's a southeast or a south-southeast wind, and in particular for Long Island, for the south shore of Long Island, for the high tides with this south wind, because that is going to persist. That's going to start tomorrow morning in terms of the direction, and we're going to see it lasting through Friday. So we've got a long duration of southerly winds. Water is going to be able to pile up, and this is how the NAM sees its wind profile for this system. It was a little more impressive on a couple of prior runs. The GFS has a more impressive looking wind profile here for Friday morning, where it's actually showing sustained winds of 30 knots or higher right along and off the coast of New Jersey to the south shore of Long Island, and then it's got this 40-knot bubble that pops up over eastern Long Island. Also notice, by the way, very strong winds off the southeast coast. You're seeing 40 knots or higher off the Carolinas that show up, and off the east coast of Florida, as this low and the cold front associated with it begins to move on through. The aftermath of the severe weather that we'll probably see on Thursday. So fairly windy conditions along both the west coast and the east coast of Florida, and then translating off the southeast coast, where you're looking at sustained winds of 40 to even 50 knots off the South Carolina and North Carolina coast. And then finally, this all pulls away. But again, going into Saturday, all day Saturday, you've got this tight gradient, and that is going to be impacting travel. All right, so now let's move to Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, because this is where this is one of those situations where if you're a forecaster, you get annoyed. All right, you want some semblance of model consistency when you're dealing with this stuff. Okay, and yes, they are going to be. You look for some. You look for the differences. You expect to see some differences, but when you see models have basically two different worlds or 180-degree views of what's going to happen for early next week, it gets very frustrating on my end. And I'm specifically referring to the possibility of whether there'll be a white Christmas or not. If you look at just about every model that's out there, I have not looked at the new parallel GFS, and we will do that. If you look at every model that's out there, every model says Monday and Tuesday are pretty much non-events. It's just going to be nice and dry and cold for much of the Northeast and into the Mid-Atlantic states. The European is the only one, and it keeps insisting, although it has been jumping around, it seems to be seeing other short waves that other models aren't seeing, and it winds up amplifying one to some degree on Christmas Day. So at this point, let me just run through the GFS on the new GFS. So we do actually have a trough that's approaching on the GFS and the European for Sunday night into Monday morning. And the GFS has now kind of come along to the idea that there might be some precip, light precip, Sunday night into Monday morning for parts of the east, specifically a stripe of rain and maybe some snow on the northern fringe. It'll be light stuff. We don't have enough cold air yet to cause any problems, but it'll be light precip. The European has the same notion. After that, it's gone, and you know, look at the GFS. It's got this ridge that it pops up over the east and Midwest, and that is for late Tuesday, late Christmas Day. All right, so that is the GFS, and I'm going to back it up here to Christmas morning. You got the beginnings of this ridge building from right along, say, 85 degrees west, all the way up into actually maybe a little further west than that, maybe close to 90 degrees west, going up into the Great Lakes. Now, watch the European and look at the difference in what the European has, because the European is actually picking up on another shortwave in here. This shortwave that runs from Iowa down into Missouri, and it carries it along. It kind of weakens it as it moves to off the New Jersey coast Wednesday morning. There's also, if you look up near Lake Superior, there's a shortwave there in the northern stream that kind of kicks everything along. And then the European wants to build a strong ridge after that for later next week. So what does that mean in terms of the actual weather that's going on? Well, we can take a look at the surface map. And here is the European on Tuesday morning with a low sitting in southern Illinois and high pressure that is in southeastern Canada, just east of Lake Huron, and kind of enveloping around it. This would create low-level cold air that would probably drain southward. This low by Wednesday morning on the European it doesn't strengthen, it actually weakens a bit, and it's east of the New Jersey coast. The model actually generates, if you give me 1 second here, I will get it for you. It'll just take me a moment. I have to pull it up from a website post that I did about it. And this is on meteorologistjoechaffee.com if you want to read about this on your own a bit later on. You can do that. But here is what the European, as soon as it loads, there we go. So this is what the European generated from this particular weather system. It gave anywhere from a quarter of an inch of liquid to some places in that 4 to 8 inch band, generated up to 3/4 of an inch or more of liquid as that shortwave trough moves on through. It's a narrow band, but it puts a lot of places in sights for a white Christmas. The snow would be later Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday night into the early morning hours of Wednesday. The problem here is the fact that there is really no other model supporting this, not to the extent that the European has. If you want to use your imagination with all of this, you could say, well, there are short waves in there, and there are, but the other models are just, they're just flattening them out in the flow, and you can barely find them, and perhaps they'll produce some clouds here and there, but nothing more. Here is the GFS for Wednesday morning when the lows are, the European, and now I'll switch you to the GFS. Same time frame, folks, same time frame. Again, it's like you're in two different worlds here. The GFS doesn't see this. The Canadian model has a totally different view, because the Canadian model actually sees the northern stream shortwave but doesn't see the southern stream shortwave. So it's just pretty much another cold front, and has the exact opposite kind of weather for later next week, by the way, than the other models do. So instead of a big warm-up, it actually has it turning colder after Christmas into the latter part of next week. Ha ha. So I'm wondering whether, since it seems like when we're looking at some of these longer range signals, I wonder whether we're starting to see some of them perhaps hinting at the idea of these signals going to some extreme readings at some point down the road, and oftentimes models misbehave when we get into these situations. Now here's the parallel GFS. Now I've got it too far ahead, but even the parallel GFS, it has this kind of weak system for Monday, and I'll put the surface map up, and then it's got nothing for Tuesday. Nothing. Okay, high pressure. Okay, and it goes out. So the parallel GFS, again, in a completely different world from the European. You know what? I'm kind of a Christmas traditionalist, so I have to admit I would love to see a little bit of snow on Christmas Day for a white Christmas. I know it can, if you have to drive in it, you don't want to see it, and I don't blame you. There's just like a part of me, and I'm going to be having to drive in it because I'm actually working Christmas Day. So I would be driving in it since I'll be getting out at about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. So if the European winds up being right, I'll be in the middle of it. It doesn't look like anything overly impressive for New York City. It gave about 2 inches to New York City. It gave about 2 inches to Philadelphia. It gave a coating to an inch down to about D.C., Baltimore. Higher amounts as you go west across Pennsylvania and into Ohio and Indiana. It gave some 8, 9, 10-inch amounts in some places. Again, that's the European. No other model supports what the European is doing. So I'm still rating it as a long shot. In fact, I'm at the point where I'm getting annoyed that the European is still doing this. I really wish it would just kind of cave and do what the other models are doing, which is nothing, and just keeping things simple. This is the stripe of precip that now the GFS has for later on Monday. The European has this for Sunday night, Monday morning. The GFS has it for Monday afternoon and evening. It's all light stuff. It goes out. High builds in. And then as we go to the latter part of next week, the next low runs towards the Great Lakes because we don't have any blocking to speak of, and then moves away. You get something coming down from the north as we get toward December 30th with some cold air. I think what you're going to see happen in the next several days, I think you're going to start to see models adjusting to all the big changes that may be happening in the longer range. So look for some weird things to start showing up in a few places. This is also a great example, by the way, of why you can't go crazy when you see, if you go back a couple of runs ago from the parallel GFS had some big snowstorm later next week, if I remember correctly. Now it's lost it. Who knows if the upper air pattern is going to change some more with what it's forecasting. The dayside GFS run was so ridiculously warm, had the big ridge in the east, trough in the west as we went into the first week of January. Now it's, the operational and even the parallel has gotten a little colder on this particular run. It's starting to bring more troughing back into the east and more ridging back into the west. That polar connection is getting a bit more established on this late afternoon GFS parallel run and also on the operational run as we're going into the first days of January. I did see a tweet from Dr. Judah Cohen regarding those first days in January, and he thinks that there might be a signal here being given as far as a potential for a storm in the east. We'll see. I'm not 100% sold on that yet, but I kind of see where he's going with it, but I'm not quite there. I just want to show you, by the way, we've been talking a lot about the stratosphere and everything that's been going on up there with the polar vortex in the stratosphere splitting and getting displaced. And I got to tell you, from what it did today, come on, what am I doing here? There we go. Hitting the wrong buttons. We on the latest runs, we're seeing a full wholesale split here of the polar vortex. And if you haven't been watching the last few days, you can actually see what's happening. Now, when you're way up in the atmosphere, you basically only have one low and one high. When you see the polar vortex in the stratosphere, okay, you are seeing the tight nature. It's going to want to have cold. When you see the polar vortex, like is a tight low, almost like a ball, the cold air is drawn toward it. Okay, it's not widespread. It's more concentrated. When you see it be weak and it spreads out, it's spreading cold air out over a larger geographic area. We go from the early part of this, which actually starts back on the 16th, and if you watch what happens to that brownish area that's over near, if you go look on the far right between 56 and 60, you can see this patchy brown area. That is warm air that it picks up from the stratosphere, picks up from Africa, brings it across Europe and Siberia. Now you can see it gets really, really that reddish color. This is really super warm air. It's getting supercharged warm air. The polar vortex here is being attacked, and a big upper high is building. The polar vortex is stretching, weakening, and now orienting itself pretty much northeast, southwest from Eastern Europe, northeastern Europe, across the North Atlantic through Greenland and into eastern Canada. And as we get toward the end of the period, the high is so strong that it actually splits that vortex in two. Part of it goes back to Siberia. The other part drops over southern Greenland, and use your imagination. You think it might even drop a little bit further and head down toward Labrador. This is a very significant development. If the model is correct here, this is an indicator that we're going to see some pretty serious wintertime weather going. There's a lag time of about 10 days or 10 days to maybe as much as 2 weeks. But it certainly says that as we get past the first week of January, we're going to be seeing ample signs of a very wintry pattern taking hold in the eastern part of the United States, if this is correct. I've seen the GFS split this vortex in the upper atmosphere many times in the last couple of years, and it doesn't always happen. It's kind of been like it's kind of been almost like my running line when it comes to blocking in the North Atlantic and the negative NAO. There was a stretch there where the GFS forecasted maybe 22 out of the last 2 blocking episodes. It kept forecasting, and it never ever seemed to happen. It did happen late last February and last March, and we saw what the outcome was with that. So, you snow weenies out there and winter weather lovers, you're going to have to, obviously we're in this thawish pattern. It for you guys, it requires patience to see where it goes. In my view, we're just kind of seeing typical stuff for this time of year. It's been my experience that the winter pattern in normal years, toward the very end of December and the beginning of January, is the locking period where we evolve into whatever the winter pattern is going to be, and we just kind of lock in and keep that locked in for about 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks. And it seems to me like that's where we are here, where we're in this, transitional period coming out of this last pattern that's lasting a couple of weeks, and then we're going to lock into whatever it is we're going to lock into. And that's the mystery, folks. That's part of the exciting world that weather folks operate in when it comes to forecasting. Frustrating, always a challenge. I did see Matt earlier. He's probably He was on earlier. I don't know if you're still on there, Matt, and you were asking about if about the long range and my views on it. Matt Coletta, you said about the long range. Why even do it if there's so much variability? Well, I'm always willing to take a challenge and learn something, and that's kind of that's kind of where my mind is at when it comes to the long range. I don't have a good understanding of all the intricacies and all the technical stuff that you got to look at. Not just there, but you got to look at stuff out in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific. And I honestly, I don't have time for that. If I did that, I couldn't do my YouTube live stream. And it's the type of thing where I can't just sit there for a half hour or 45 minutes or an hour. You got to go really deep into this stuff. Maybe if I worked with it on a regular basis, but there's a time constraint. You're doing short to medium range, as opposed to doing long range and then doing long range. Something's got to give someplace in terms of time, and I just don't have the patience to give that extra time that's required with regards to looking at the long range. I give you a cursory view, just kind of a basic overview. But there's a lot of people out there that you can take a look at that are really into this long range stuff and know all the technical nuances and all the stuff that you got to look at. Go to on Twitter and follow Dr. Judah Cohen, and he's a tough read, but that's his focus. That's his thing. Let's see, Anthony Orr, good to see you on board tonight. If it happens the way the models show, could it be a possibility that snow lovers got too much more what they wanted? Oh, absolutely. Anthony, you make a very good point. We could have all this happen, okay? You could have that polar vortex split and drop southward the way it is. If you get too much of a good thing, if you want to put it that way, you could overwhelm cold air and force everything so far south that, depending on your location, you might be fighting it when it comes to snow. That's happened before, so I can't rule that out. I don't know where this is ultimately going to wind up in terms of the practical day-to-day nature of what happens weather-wise. You could have the best pattern in the world. I've said this many times. You can have the best-looking overall pattern in the world, but if you're in terms of the broad picture, but if you don't have your troughs in the right place, if your ridges aren't at the right place, or maybe they're in the right place but at the wrong timing. If you don't have all those pieces put together, it ain't going to happen. And that's just that's just the fact. It's tough to get. If it was easy to happen, we'd be getting snowstorms pretty much every day from mid-November to mid-April. But thankfully it doesn't happen that way. That we do wind up with a lot of variability in the pattern inside the overall basic pattern that you're in, so that you do get different things that are happening. Warm air comes in off the ocean. The trough axis is a little bit too far east or a little bit too far west, so storms are too far offshore, not far enough offshore. Too far inland, not far enough inland. Too far north, too far south. It happens, and that is not something we could look at now and say, okay, the polar vortex is going to split. We're going to get all this cold air, and we're going to be going crazy with snow. I will tell you that I will say that some of the monthlies, the European and I think the UCMET monthly snow forecasts are very bullish from the mid-Atlantic states up through to the north. They were kind of crazy bullish in terms of snow amounts for the month of January. Let's see if it verifies. I will say that last year the Europeans' monthly snow monthlies that it did from mid-February to the end of March were scary good. Okay, scary good. So let's see if it winds up being consistent. Let's see. Jason Schaefer heard an interesting podcast today about Planalytics. Apparently retail is willing to pay a lot to see modeled how long range affects sales patterns. Yes, it's been known in the retail industry. Their big months are the fall and winter, and into the spring, but particularly the fall into the winter going in around Christmas. They do not like, when it comes to retail apparel, they want it cold. Because this way, when it's cold, people buy new sweaters, new jackets, new coats, etc., etc. When we've had those warm winters, and go back to that El Nino year in 15-16, where we had temperatures at 70 degrees here on Christmas Day and Christmas Eve, you went the whole month without, pretty much seeing a winter jacket. And if you're a retailer, well, you're not going to sell winter jackets in the Northeast if temperatures are in the 60s and 70s. So yeah, weather does, certain types of weather does impact the retail sales and whether they increase or decrease. So that's very interesting. And if you watch CNBC, I'm sure they have mentioned this from time to time when they do if they're focusing on retailers. Right now, Green Fire, yes, the storm track is west of the Appalachians. If the vortex pushes east, storms could come up the coast. Well, the upper air is set up a bit differently right now. What you have to change is what's going on in Canada, because the flow being basically west to east across North America, and now of course you've got this phase that's going on with the trough full phase and lifting northward. Yeah, you got to get the trough much further east of where it is. It's right at west of 90, and that certainly is not going to do you any kind of good. Robbie Hill, you're hoping Pennsylvania gets snowed in from January 15th to March 15th. So you basically want about 60 days of nonstop snow. Tough to do. But hey, look, if the signals are right, then that's maybe what might happen this year is something that I saw Cranky Weather Guy on Twitter mention. And that is the fact that maybe this year we're going to wind up where winter actually happens during the prime winter period, and that spring, instead of getting delayed until late April or early May, winds up coming in on time. On time. Reaver, what level do we look at? We look at 500. 500 is the standard level to look at. I think that illustrates we could look at the 700, we could look at the 250, we could look at the 300, we could look at any level really that we want, but the 500 millibar level is kind of the place where all us weather people go. It gives the best picture, I think, of the overall atmosphere because it's kind of right in the middle, so it gives us a good average picture of what is going on. And especially when it comes to the upper flow, it's definitely a good place to be. William Huber is recalling the January of '78. There was a storm similar to this track that came about 10 days, the biggest snowstorm before the February 6th storm. Yes, there was one. You had something like this that ran up into the Great Lakes and basically washed all the snow away that had fallen during the week of from the 13th to the 20th. So your memory is very good. And it also happened in '96, where I believe it was the Cleveland blizzard that occurred in between. After the blizzard of '96 came the Cleveland blizzard, washed everything away. There was no snow cover left. And then the snow came back when we went into February. Rick 8013 looks like late tomorrow night. It's about 8Z. Severe thunderstorms, heavy rain, gales, southeast North Carolina. I totally agree. Merry Christmas to you too, by the way. And I'm just running back. By the way, hi to all of my regulars: Timothy Veltman, David Schwartz, Jess Harden. I know you want to see snow in Alabama in January. You get that polar vortex. The best I can say is if you get the pattern change that's being indicated, if we get that pattern change that's being indicated, then you'll have your shot, and maybe you'll have more than one shot. Scott Briller, if this was Sunday night or Sunday morning, and the European was still showing this, but all the other models had nothing, how would a meteorologist make the forecast? Well, I mean, if it was Sunday night, if it's still just one model hanging out, assuming that if I would probably hedge, but if I would have to find evidence that at that point there should be enough evidence to prove that the European was going to be correct. So if I didn't see that evidence, I probably would lean against. I would start leaning against. Okay, I really would like to see, and there's time. It's only Wednesday. I would like to see some evidence on the other models, even if it's just a hint of something to support what the Europeans doing. If you ask me, and you probably will, okay, because we're talking about it. So if you're asking me to make my judgment now, I would probably lean against what the European is doing. The only thing that bothers me is the fact that it keeps doing it. All right, it doesn't. It hasn't really changed very much. I mean, it kind of flipped. It's been flipping a bit on the time emphasis, whether it's Monday or Tuesday, but it keeps doing something. The NAM is not quite into that time frame yet, so I'd like to see when we get to when the NAM is in the in its 84-hour time range where it starts to get into Monday night and Tuesday. Then at least the NAM will give me some clues. The NAM oftentimes likes to mimic the European to some degree, so it may not necessarily be helpful. But if the NAM, for example, doesn't mimic the European, then that's probably a sign that the European is going to be wrong. The European model is not a perfect model. It has its flaws, and it doesn't always get this stuff. Okay. Laissez. I hope I remembered. I see you're on here. Did I get it right? Or Lacy? Lacy? Beloki. Good to see you on board. I did tell you, by the way, that when you did come back, I probably was going to forget and was going to have to ask you again. But always good to see you here. The Canadian is showing a cold front, if I remember correctly. I showed it before. Let me just get a reminder. Okay. I'm not going to bring the map up on the screen, David. I'll just go back. Yeah, I mean, the Canadian has. I mean, it has nothing for Monday night, or Tuesday. It has a cold front coming through later on Wednesday with some colder air behind it. Its vision of reality is completely different. So I guess that maybe wraps it up. 99 Wolves. You think I got a shot for Christmas snow? Hey, if the European is right, Chicago might get at least a few inches out of it. So that's really your only support. I wish I could tell you, I wish we were in a situation that at least if one of the other major models, forget the Canadian, but if the GFS were on board, or, when we get inside the NAMS range, again, that'll probably be important. But if the GFS, even the Icon doesn't have anything, the German model doesn't have anything. The only other thing I didn't even get a chance to look at were the ensembles. And let me just take a quick look at those. Perhaps the ensembles would give us a clue. I mean, the European ensembles actually don't have anything. The operational, from what I'm seeing, I can't see all of them, so I gotta be a little careful. I'm just kind of guessing from what I see on the 500, and on the let's go to the GFS. The ensembles on the GFS. It doesn't look like the GFS ensembles have much of anything either. So the operational European seems to be in its own little world. The odds lie. Zim. Okay, that makes it easier. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. You want another Judah Cohen visit, David Schwartz? I'll try. I haven't had time to reach out to him, and with Christmas and everything else, I haven't really had time to reach out to him. So when we get past the holidays, if he's not busy, I'll try again. Okay. Okay, what is Seth Dominus doing? Is he not behaving himself? All right, let's see. You know what? I'm running out of time here. It's past over an hour, so I think it's time for me to say goodbye. Seth Dominus 777. If you're not behaving yourself, behave yourself. Okay. All right. So we'll call it a night at this point. So let's just do my usual round of a little bit of business, and that is to let you know, of course, that I've got my subscription platform on Patreon. By the way, for my Patreon members that are on tonight, I have not been able to do these live streams during the morning hours for you this week. I've actually got something going on with my neck that has caused me some pain in the morning, among other things. Between that and all the Christmas stuff that has to get done, I had a few other things to take care of, and I got a dentist appointment tomorrow. So I'll try to sneak one in there somewhere, but things should start to settle down a bit once we get past the holidays. But I'll definitely do something on Friday, and with what's going on, and also over the weekend. The Green Fire, the morning live streams. If you can't make them, the links are up there for you if you want to watch them on a replay, okay? And you guys get the, I've put up, and I'll put it up again, there is a library on YouTube that's available only to Patreon members, so I'll put that library link up there, so in case you want to watch it at a different time, you can go ahead and do that. So Patreon members do get exclusive live streams. They also get posts that don't show up on the website. Plus, you can message me at any time. If snow is an issue regarding for what you do for a living, you can take one of the higher tiers of subscription, and I will hold your hand a bit more during these snowstorms, or even a lot more. So just putting it out there for you. But the basic is $2 a month, and you can go ahead and be part of the Patreon team. It's all weather people. There's no nonsense that goes on there. We don't have flat earthers. There's no need for moderators, because everybody is kind and courteous and behaves themselves, which is, I guess, the best way to put it. If you're in the northern New Jersey, New York City, Long Island, southern Connecticut, the lower Hudson Valley, if you're in that area, I do have a free weather app on Google Play for your Android device, and you can download it and install it and enjoy it. There'll be an update on that coming out soon. And as I've been saying almost every day on infinitum, hopefully one of these days Apple will come along and say, hey, you're on the app store for iPhones. And as soon as that happens, I will, of course, let you know about that. And since there are only a handful of shopping days left till Christmas, if you shop online on Amazon, you can do it through my Amazon link, which I've just now put also up on the chat. It's on the descriptor to this live stream and the descriptor to this video if you are watching it on the replay. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for this channel to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. So if you shop on Amazon, you get your stuff, and then Amazon out of their pocket puts a few cigars into my stocking. And by the way, if you can also watch, if you're on my Google app, you can watch these live streams on the Google app itself, or watch them later on a replay if that's convenient for you. So you can kind of go to one place and have all your weather in one central location. All right, folks, the Joe and Joe Weather Show tonight at roughly 9:20 on Facebook. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. And tomorrow, regular live stream coming up at the usual time, 7 o'clock Eastern. And Patreon guys and gals, just keep an eye on your notifications, because you'll get posts along the way for overnight and during the day tomorrow. And hopefully, if I got a little time, I'll do a live stream. If I do a Patreon live stream tomorrow, it'll be probably after I get done with the dentist. So figure after 11 o'clock. keep your fingers crossed. I don't think I have anything serious going on because it's a simple cleaning. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for hanging around for over an hour. Really appreciate it.